Day 2, SEC Media Days, is in the books. We're at halftime. The marching band is on the field. We've got 2 more days of listening to coaches and players. Highlights of Day 2, Todd. I thought one of the more interesting players that we talked to today was Trevor Knight, the Texas A&M quarterback, former OU quarterback, but now is a graduate student transfer at A&M. I just think he handled himself so well in there today.
He did, and he's already been named the starter coming out of spring football. But I thought one of the interesting things he talked about was when he first got his release from Oklahoma, he actually reached out to Kevin Sumlin and Texas A&M, and they had no interest. They were like, we already got these 2 quarterbacks, Kyler Murray and Kyle Allen. We're kind of set there. I don't know that you fit with our program. And then a week later, both guys ended up transferring, and all of a sudden, the tone of the conversations Trevor Knight was having with Kevin Sumlin changed. And now the team is really thrilled that they have him. I mean, he was a Sugar Bowl MVP for Oklahoma. Kind of got bumped out of the way by Baker Mayfield last year. But he's a guy with experience. He's played, in some SEC venues and some very big games before. So he could end up kind of being a savior in some ways for this A&M program this year. And it's an A&M program that's been pretty good, but is still trying to get to that next level under Kevin Sumlin.
Right, already named the starter, and that's kind of unusual for a Kevin Sumlin coach team. The other, maybe another highlight today, Mississippi State coach Dan Mullen. I didn't think
this is more of a low light.
It didn't have a good day. Of course, Mississippi State's had some terrific years under Mullen here in the last few, and the program has turned around. It's been a good story in college football. What's not a good story for college football are domestic violence and sexual assault cases, one of which involves a recruit of Mississippi State's, Jeffrey Simmons.
Sure.
Was caught on video punching a female, and Dan Mullen hadn't said much about it until today at SEC Media Days. And what he said today, I just didn't think
it was tone deaf.
It was bad.
He talked about needing to give a guy a second chance and things like that. And he was asked whether how comfortable he'd be if his wife or his daughter had been the one who had been assaulted, and he said, "Well, I don't think my wife or daughter would be in that situation."
What a bad answer that was. But then he tried to
terrifically awful. I mean,
yes, but then he tried to explain that, like you said, try to talk about second chances. And look, I think we all agree with second chances, but I just don't think there's been enough contrition here. It's just. He handled the whole thing poorly today. You can read about that in the Kansas City Star.
And his team, I felt bad for his teammates because here they are. They're coming.
To talk about it.
It's their moment at SEC Media Days, and nobody asked A.J. Johnson any questions about him or his goals for the season or stuff like that. Every question he got was about this Jeffrey Simmons kid. And look, all the kids had been coached, and gave talked about his work ethic and how he's worked hard to be a good teammate and things like that. But I mean, look, they suspended the kid for 1 game, after this video came out, and went ahead and kind of fast-tracked his enrollment after the video came out. And it's a bad look for Mississippi State and for Dan Mullen, especially. That's a program that has a sign in their locker room about treating women with respect, and that's a big, one of the fundamental, chair legs, so to speak, of the seat on which Dan Mullen sits as the head coach of Mississippi State. And it seems like it's more lip service than it is any conviction there.
I agree. So Georgia and Tennessee were also on stage today. I wrote about Tennessee, a program that for the last 8 or 9 years I thought has overpromised and underdelivered. But boy, there's a good vibe about this Vols team. They're going to be picked to win the East. I think they're going to be almost not a unanimous, but certainly a consensus pick to win the East. How are they handling that pressure? I talked to Butch Jones and some players about that today. Todd Palmer also, Georgia was on stage. What do we get out of Georgia?
Yeah, I guess the most interesting thing, look, Kirby Smart handled himself very well as a first-year guy at the SEC Media Days, first-year coach. Nick Chubb is on track, but may not quite be ready for the start of training camp and or the season. Sony Michel, who broke his forearm in an ATV accident, again, may not be ready for the start of the season. So Georgia, once again, as has been the case the last 2 or 3 years, injuries are really biting them hard. And of course, Missouri, which hasn't faced their top tailback in since like 1972 or something, may somehow dodge Nick Chubb and Sony Michel again this year because they play them in September. So it's incredible.
They didn't match up against Herschel Walker, I remember, right? Yeah. So, all right. So speaking of Mizzou, the Tigers take the stage tomorrow, along with Alabama, Arkansas, and Kentucky. Follow the coverage of SEC Media Days throughout the week in the print editions of the Kansas City Star and online at kansascity.com.